Hello, hello, happy Thursday. We are up in Healing Alley, Feel Good Lane. We are talking triggers. Cheers to you. We're talking about what makes us go off. Hola, prima, what's up, Ash? We're talking about what makes us go off when we get upset, when we are angry, when we are anxious, when we are mad, and we don't know how to identify that that's a trigger, but we have all the feelings. We're talking about what those triggering feelings are talking about. What are they pointing to? We have two dope healing queens in the building. We're starting the conversation with school social worker Jasmine, and we are rounding out the conversation with spiritual healer, reader, coach, dope queen SJ. So bring on your vibes, bring on your energy. Let us know what supported you to get free of your triggers, of your wounds, of your trauma. If you're not there yet, you're in the right place, because we're talking about what's the work to identify the trigger, what's the work to manage the trigger, and how can we figure out what the trigger is pointing to so that we don't keep carrying that bag over and over and dealing with the trigger over and over again. So share out the live, let people know what we're doing here. It's always a space for healing. It's always a space for feeling good. Cheers to you. And I hope that you get what you want and what you need. Sarai, I hope that you are watching this from DR, girl. I hope that you are full of sun and love and good vibes and you're refreshed. So cheers to you guys. It's the baddest. We're starting off the conversation with social worker, school social worker Jasmine. We're talking about triggers, trauma, wounds. What are the triggers pointing to? What happens when we don't know that a trigger is a trigger and we're just angry, we're mad, we're sad, we're anxious, and we think that it's all a matter of what the other person is making us feel, the right reaction that we're having to an environment, and we don't recognize that it's actually a trauma response. What's up, Emmanuel? Oh, I'm trying to stay up with you, Sarai. But we're talking triggers, we're talking trauma, we're talking about how to deal with the energy that we receive from the world when it sets us off, when it takes us to 100. What does that mean for us? What's the work for us to scale it back, wind ourselves down, kind of get calm so that we're not constantly in a state where we're going off on people and getting fired from our jobs? So we're tapping in Jasmine. She's a dope ass healing queen. She's a school social worker. She's in the building now. She is like straight out of work. She's trying to make this work for us. So we're gonna give her all the healing and the peaceful vibes. Tap in, folks. Let us know how you figured out what your triggers were. Go ahead and share out the live. Let people know what we're doing here, because you know that it is a healing space. You know that it is a space for making sure that we're in community and that we're together. So cheers to you, and make sure you have something good. Hello, Queen. Hello. Cheers, cheers, cheers. Oh, man.
I had a drink.
I know. I appreciate you. Thank you for making this work.
Yes. I was like, oh my goodness. I've been working from home for the last year, and now our students are finally coming back. And
Yeah.
of course, like, kids aren't even back in session, and I'm already getting calls for emergencies. So
I know. I appreciate you. I know that she's on the best coast, y'all. And she also had a situation at work that she was dealing with, and she figured out how to make this work anyway. So appreciate you so much, Jasmine. Thank you.
So, parked in my car in South LA, on some side street, but
It's cool. It's cool. We'll make sure that the police don't walk by thinking that you're doing something sketchy. It's healing things. It's healing things. So Jasmine, thank you again. We are talking triggers, trauma, wounds, and the relationship between triggers and our trauma. To start, I know that you are a dope ass queen. You're a social worker, a school social worker. You're passionate about allyship, about representation, about racial equity. But you tell us, please, about your sunshine and how you share your gifts with the world.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You're a dope ass queen too, so I'm very excited to be here. So my name is Jasmine Lamid. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm currently the director of mental health for 23 schools in Los Angeles, K through 8th grade. Oh, let me take off my which school I'm at here, in case I say anything crazy. But yeah, so I've been a social worker now for about 12 years, providing supports for students, ages 5 through 14, support the families, the community. My passion is trauma-informed schools, trauma-informed teaching, trauma-informed counseling. So definitely, actually, I was just working on a presentation about this for tomorrow for my staff because they're coming back. They're all back. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about what I know and what makes me excited. Well, I'm a mom. I had a pandemic little princess, so I enjoy. She is about to be 16 months. She came about 3 weeks after our school shut down in 2020, so I've been home. So that's the silver lining for the pandemic.
Aww, aww. So, folks, we are talking triggers and trauma. So, to set the stage, can you please, Jasmine, talk a little bit about triggers and what exactly what are they? What exactly are triggers?
Yeah, so I think, triggers is something that we use very colloquially, just kind of casually. But when you think about the actual definition of a trigger, it's really a memory in response to either an internal or external event that kind of brings you back to a traumatic experience that you had. And so with triggers, it could be really anything because trauma is a sensory experience. We often think about an event being traumatic, but two people can go through seemingly the same event and one person has trauma from it and the other person, bounces back and is fine. It's really about how you feel after an event that's traumatic. And so when I say it's sensory, it's because it really lives in our limbic emotional center of our brain. Not to get with you here, but that part of our brain is really tied into our senses. So if you've been through a traumatic experience, you might remember the sounds, the smells, like even the food that you ate right before. So it's really connected to our 5 senses. So anything can trigger that trauma. Talk a little bit about the types of things that trigger it, especially what I see for students, and even the teachers and staff that I support.
Yeah, and I love that you highlight how it's a sensory experience because I read somewhere that the trigger can be kind of like the echo from that trauma or that wound. So it's just like however you ended up experiencing that traumatic event or experiences, that is like kind of like the echo of that, and it literally takes you back to that space.
Absolutely. Yeah. They talk about, having flashbacks or nightmares. It can happen in such a quick moment that if you're not aware of your trigger, you know where this is coming from, or you're not prepared, walking into a space knowing, hey, I'm kind of seeing something that caused me to have a triggering moment too.
Folks, we're talking triggers, trauma, and most importantly, the healing work that is available to us here with Jasmine, Dope Ass Queen and School Social Worker. So for us, you mentioned some of this already, but what are some of the experiences that we can have when we are triggered? Like what are some signs that we're experiencing a trigger?
Yeah, so it's really a trigger. Kind of think of it as your alarm system in your body. It's telling you this is not safe. It might be starting your fight or flight or freeze response, which you might have. That's kind of a start of like, hey, this is not a safe space to be in. You either need to fight periods, you need to freeze, or get the fuck out of it, right? That's our flight response. And so really it can look differently for anybody. So important to recognize how you, do you typically respond to fight situation? Do you typically freeze? Do you typically, how is it for you? And so when I work with students, even families, what we see is students might get like aggressive like behavior, combative, very defensive, heart rate starts to pound, your pupils dilate, you might start sweating. So you can have really physical responses to kind of that stimuli reminding you of that traumatic experience, because it's really getting your body ready to react to state.
Oh, oh.
In this way for a purpose, right? If we didn't have this kind of alarm system making all of these physical sensations happen, we might just be kind of sitting ducks for, I don't know, if a lion was attacking you or something like that, if we think back to evolutionary reasons why we have this fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you know, if you do go through a traumatic experience, you haven't really started that healing process, the triggers can kind of catch you off guard. So I have lots of examples of this with kids. You know, they think that everything is fine. I have an example of a student who was abused as a child, and we didn't know this going in. They were in second grade and they were new to us, and the teacher was writing ED on the board, like jumped, you know, ED words, and the student had a complete meltdown, left the class, and we were like, what in the world's going on? Found out that the student was sexually abused by their uncle Ed. And so just seeing that ED over and over again triggered that response. I've had another student who was in a fire as a kid. It's middle school now, but anytime they heard a fire engine, would immediately have a triggering response. It brought him back to that event. So, you know, it could be a perfume that you wear or that somebody else wears. If you had a really bad relationship, somebody walks by wearing that cologne, that could be a triggering event too, because it really pulls you back to that traumatic experience.
That is so helpful that you frame it in the way that a lot of times we can be triggered and something can take us back, but we can be completely unaware of what is taking us back to. We're just having an experience, and however it's showing up for us, physical, emotional, however, and it's in response to something that was clearly triggering, but that doesn't mean that we're able to connect the dots.
Yeah, and I mean, with trauma, you know, especially if it happens before the age of 5, before like real language development is there, a child may not have an actual memory that they can articulate, but the senses are all there. So they can get triggered by something and not know where it comes from. Or as an adult, part of a survival mechanism, we push down a lot of the details of things, but the sensory experiences are still there in our brain to trigger that alarm system. That's why it's so important to really try to get to the root cause of where the traumatic experience is coming from, really, you know, try to get deep to really figure out what's going on.
So when we're in that space, and folks who have jumped on, we're here with Jasmine. She is healing queen. She's a school social worker. She is a trauma-informed practitioner, and we're talking about triggers, what they point to that's deeper that we may not be aware about, and what's the work to start to addressing these deeper traumas and to manage our triggers. So in the case that we aren't aware about our triggers, what's some of our work to try to uncover, to identify what is triggering to us?
Yeah. So, you know, it depends on kind of where you are in your healing. If you know that you've experienced a traumatic event, like I said before, if you feel it was traumatic, it's traumatic. Don't ever say, well, that wasn't traumatic. It's if you're feeling that it was traumatic, absolutely, that's, you know, you should definitely be working on.
Oh no, you froze for me. I don't know if she froze for everybody else. Instagrams, once again, my nemesis. I have a love-hate relationship with Instagram. Let me know if she froze for you guys, so I can figure out my situation on this end. But we're talking trauma, we're talking triggers, and how to identify what is triggering for us. Okay, good. All right, so it seems that she was frozen. Okay, good. So we'll tap her back in. But folks, we are at the baddest, and we're talking about trauma. We're talking about triggers. We're talking about the work to identify our trauma and our triggers and how to manage it. But most importantly, how to deal with what our triggers are pointing to, because a lot of times we have triggering we have triggering experiences, but we're not able to identify why is it triggering for us. We just think that it's a normal reaction and that we're just responding to other people, we're responding to the world, but in actuality, it's a trauma response, it's a wound response. So we're breaking all of that down. We have Miss Jasmine in the building. She's going to come back. Instagram is doing things. And we also are going to bring in SJ. She is a healer. She is a dope ass coach and queen. And we're talking about the work to uncover the trauma, but to also manage the triggers while we're working through that healing process. So while we get Jasmine back in the building, tell us, what was your process for identifying some triggers for you? What are some triggers for you? I was talking to someone earlier about triggering experiences and how I just took them for granted as just the way that I was reacting, right? And something that's triggering for me is being like talked down to. When I feel like someone is talking down to me, it's very triggering. So yeah, Jasmine, so we were talking about Instagram does all types of things. So it's just like how it is.
Like a really hot spot and my phone got too hot and it was like, nope, you can't do that. I'm like, oh gosh, that's LA for you. I think I was about to talk about, what you can do to start like recognizing triggers and start that healing process. What I was going to say is I'm a big proponent of therapy. But I think,
but you came back and like you have like a different glow. Like, what do you do?
I just think I'm sitting in the sun now. Different angle, trying to like save the shade. Trying to make
doing things for you.
Oh, thank you. It's that like, almost sundown glow. Yeah, so I would say, I'm a big proponent of therapy with a caveat. I think finding the right therapist is like a relationship. It's very important to find the right person. I've had really terrible experiences with therapists. I think, if you are a woman of color, if you're part of the LGBTQ community, finding somebody that really affirms your identity and understands it, and you don't have to spend any time explaining any of those systems of oppression you experience, like that is really critical. And I know there definitely are a shortage of people of color and LGBTQ therapists like within your area, but I would definitely recommend that. I think that's really important to just recognize the intersectionality of any trauma you experience with oppression. But a therapist can be really great because they can, one, especially if they're trained in trauma, so making sure that they are trained, that they are licensed, because a lot of people can say, oh, I'm a therapist. Like, what kind of therapist are you? What do you do? So really viewing that like first meeting as like you're interviewing them. Do you want this money? Are you all right for me? It can feel like a power dynamic with therapists, but you are in charge of that relationship. But, if you're like, oh, I'm not really like feeling the therapy thing, or you had a bad experience, I totally recognize that. I think there's a lot of things you can do for yourself. I think one, your support system. One of the things that I do working with kids with trauma is narrative therapy. And so really giving the child, and this works, I know they do this with adults too, the space to really share and talk about what happened. And I know it can feel counterintuitive. You want to push it down, but pushing things down, it just causes a lot of toxic stress in your body. And I could go into the science of that. And actually it's very harmful to your immune system. It has long-term negative health outcomes and connected to like cancer, diabetes, like all kinds of things if you don't start trying to kind of unpack some of the things that you went through. So talking to a trusted friend who's just really there to listen, I think can be really, really healing. I'm a big supporter of mindfulness. Really just taking time to really pause and reflect on, how you're feeling, being very self-aware of how you're feeling in a given moment, taking those deep breaths, a lot of science behind that. Journaling is really, really helpful too if you don't feel like you are ready to share your story. Sometimes just writing it out on paper and seeing it to be incredibly healing because it's kind of almost like the act of taking it out of your brain and putting it onto something else. So yeah, I would say like those three areas would be really, very helpful with the healing journey. Of course, obviously, like just taking care of yourself physically, taking care of your body as a temple. If you practice yoga, great, getting outside and going on a hike, whatever it is that makes you feel good in your body, can also really help.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, we're talking triggers, traumas, and wounds. Oh my, we're here with Jasmine and we're talking about the work to identify and address our triggers. So I think I was sharing earlier that some of the difficulty in identifying our triggers and trauma is that, for me at least, I thought it was just a normal way of reacting and engaging with the world. So when something bothered me and I had a reaction, I thought I was justified in having that reaction. Mm-hmm. So for us, what is I guess, like, how can we tell when our triggers, the way that we're reacting to the world, when our trauma, when it's something, and we're in that space where we're not fully aware that it's something that it needs to address? Like, what are some signs for us that, oh, there's something going? It's not just that they spoke to you in a certain tone or that something took you, that they were disrespectful, but this is like something that is like triggering a trauma that you have. Like, how can we tell the difference between the two?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think kind of knowing yourself and recognizing any patterns is the way that you're responding, getting in the way of the relationships that you have, whether that be with your friends, whether that be with your partner. Is it getting in the way of you progressing or having, successful relationships at work or in school? So I would look at it that way. I think a lot of times, the way that we respond in a triggering event is a survival mechanism, right?
Yes.
You triggered your fight or flight response. The goal is survival. We often train ourselves, well, this has worked for me in the past, so, I'm not going to change it now, right? And sometimes things will work for you for a long time. And then you get to a different point in your life and you recognize that those things aren't serving you anymore. So I think it is really about like being reflective, being open to feedback, kind of being able to recognize if you're not happy with the way that you're responding to things too, I think is really important. But in terms of like recognizing whether it's a trigger or just like a kind of a normal reaction, I would say with that, like, one, if you know that you have experienced trauma and you're kind of like making that connection, if you're here, you probably maybe are wondering about that. And so it might be time to kind of do some like reflection on the way that you process things that have happened in your life, traumatic experiences, relationships that you've had, and just really kind of see if there's a pattern there, to see if like, hey, is there a commonality in the way that people are responding to me based on what I'm putting out into the world.
That's good. That's good. And you mentioned mindfulness earlier. So like creating that space for ourselves to reflect, that helps. That helps. Because I know for me, another factor was not having the introspection, the self-awareness.
Yeah.
So I hadn't created the space where I was able to tell the difference between a trigger, something that was triggering me, or a response that was in line to like whatever was going on.
Yeah, and I think so I do mindfulness programs in my schools for kinder through 8th graders and predominantly Black Latino areas, because I'm like, I wish I learned about this when I was a kid, when I experienced trauma. I didn't learn about this until college, and but even for kids, but for adults, sitting silently and like listening to your thoughts, especially if you don't know where those thoughts are going to go, can be really intimidating. And so I think oftentimes, I know even me now doing this for years, I'm very fidgety, and you think like you have to sit still and you need to like not think about anything. That is not what mindfulness is. Like, let your thoughts go where they go. Like sometimes there is a voice inside that's trying to tell you something, but because you're busy or because you're not really taking a moment to listen, we miss those opportunities to really allow our bodies to heal, or to tell ourselves that it's time to heal.
And when we have gotten to that space where we're able to sit still, we're able to listen, we get to a space where we're curious, maybe we're in the space where we're like, okay, this doesn't feel good, it's affecting my relationships, all the signs that you offered us for figuring out if it's a trigger response and a trauma response. When we're there, what is the information that our triggers offer us? Like, what information do our triggers have for us?
Yeah, so I think, again, triggers really are our body's way of telling us that you're not safe. You know, you might not be safe with a particular person in a particular environment. And unfortunately, when you're constantly in that fight or flight response, your body starts to not be able to interpret what is a real danger and what is something that reminds you of a danger, right? So you're kind of reacting to things that, you know, in a normal situation, somebody wouldn't react to. So I think, you know, a trigger can definitely be, it's telling you that you're unsafe. And so really pausing and being like, what about this situation made me feel unsafe? Was it that this person's tone reminded me of like the way my mom spoke to me when I was growing up, or the way my like ex-boyfriend talked to me? You know, is it, you know, eating this food reminded me of like my grandmother and the way that she cooked and she's gone. Like, so really being able to listen to that alarm system and try to pick up those patterns to see what it is trying to communicate to you.
Yeah, that's super helpful information. Folks, we're talking triggers and trauma here with Jasmine, school social worker and divine healing queen. So once we've taken that information that our triggers offer us, how can we use that valuable, juicy info to inform our healing journey?
Yeah, so I think, you know, once you kind of recognize like a pattern of things that might be triggering to you, maybe it's like certain types of personalities, maybe it's certain tones, like if you know that you're going to be in a situation like that, taking a couple of minutes to do some mindfulness meditation, some positive self-talk, reminding yourself that you're safe, reminding yourself that you can always walk away or take a deep breath, or, you know, take a break from the situation. It's really important. You know, I would also say like just being able to just fully like being okay to recognize when you need a moment to be away from whatever it is that's triggering you. And I know sometimes we don't have that ability depending on what the situation is. And so being able, I know in therapy we really work towards like, okay, if you're recognizing that your heart is starting to pound, or if you're like you're sweating or things like that, being able to recognize those lead up moments before like the blow up, whatever that looks like to you. So, you know, because everybody, it looks different for everybody. Everyone has like those symptoms look different for everybody. But if you're recognizing, I do with this with my students, like, how do you know, like on a level of 1 to 5, like 1 is super calm, 5 is like, I'm about to do whatever my trigger response is. Like, how can you start doing interventions at level 2 so that it doesn't get to a 5, you know, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's, you know what, I'm just going to like go to my car and listen to like my favorite song. That's going to make me feel a lot better. Or, you know, I'm just going to like send a text to a loved one and say, hey, I really need something, you know, can you just give me some positive affirmations right now? Whatever it is that works for you to try to help reground you before it gets to that point can really help.
So I think that's super helpful and concrete in terms of practical things you can do to manage the trigger. And I think that it's also necessary as part of our healing journey, because we're not, just because we become aware that this is a trigger and a response to a trauma, it doesn't magically either address the trauma or eliminate the need to respond in that way to use that trigger. So can you speak a little bit about the difference or the relationship between managing the trigger and addressing the deeper underlying wound?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, if you're thinking about like managing the trigger, it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, right? Like you're like, oh, let me like dress this little wound right here so I can just make it on through the rest of my day. But if you're not getting to the deeper work of why are these triggers happening, you know, what else is going on in my life that are causing that? Maybe I have stress in other areas that are compounding my previous traumatic experience. Then it is really just putting a Band-Aid on a big wound, right? So you're just trying to survive. And we really want to thrive, right? And so really trying to get deeper so that you can get to a point where you don't have triggers like that, right? And I think I think we all have triggers at different points in our life. Different things can be very stressful for us, but if it is to the point where you're just constantly feeling like you're just surviving, it may be time to get a little deeper and you know, pursue some deeper forms of like therapy or other things like that.
Yeah, and it really, there is a difference between the two. I found it for myself. Like I've been in experiences like more recently that once upon a time I would have just gone off. Like it would have just like set me off completely. and some of my reactions, some of my trauma responses have been shut down. So I would have either like, you know, like it would have been like either crazy flight or like the blowout all out fight. And most recently I experienced similar situations and they just passed like a wave. Like I didn't even notice it. And it's true what you say, that the different thing, we react to different experiences according to where we are as reflecting in our journey, but also like we're able to heal some of those wounds and they don't trigger us in the way that they did once upon a time.
Yeah, and I think also over time sometimes things just aren't as triggering, you know, so time does heal a lot, but it doesn't heal all wounds. That phrase is just not true. So I think, you know, and as we get more mature, and I know if I think about myself, like when I was 21, the way I respond to something now versus like as a 35-year-old is very different. But sometimes the way we respond, it's even if you're not blowing up or you're not responding in those ways, it still is impacting you. So you do want to still try to do the work to make sure that those things are healing, that you're very aware of how those things have impacted you. The last thing I'll say about that is we can pass down generational trauma. So if I have any moms out there, or any, you know, caregivers of other people, or even in relationships, we often can pass on those trauma triggers to our children who didn't even experience the trauma. So, you know, an example of that is like a parent who maybe was sexually abused, who won't let their child go to any sleepovers ever because they are like have that feeling, right? And so then that child is missing out on something that usually is a really joyful experience, right? So being aware of those too as you're going into relationships, as you're being a parent or a caregiver, is helpful not just for you but for those around you as well.
And as we get ready to close, we want to squeeze out the last little bit of juice from you, the last little bit of wisdom. Can you please offer us some advice as we work to heal, to become more self-aware, and as we work toward experiencing inner peace?
Yeah, I mean, I think be really patient with yourself. You know, I think we have to love ourselves more than anybody else loves us, and you might have a lot of people that love you a lot, but definitely have patience with yourself. Really work on you know, your positive affirmations. Like I try to, when I'm in my, you know, my highest of highest selves, I try to do like mirror talk with myself, just like pumping yourself up. All of that is actually scientifically proven to really change your mood. You know, we often listen to ourselves more than anybody else. You have that running voice in your head that's telling you to brush your teeth or to do this or that. Just talking to yourself can be extremely helpful. I know it sounds a little counterintuitive because people think talking to yourself is crazy, but no, you're doing it all day in your head. So sometimes just hearing your own voice to tell you to do something in the mirror, it has such a powerful effect.
Yeah, and it is. It's a super helpful practice. Like I've used mirror work, I've used affirmation, and it does transform your experience little by little, but it happens.
Yeah, little by little. It feels weird at first. I do this with students. I have, when I do therapy, I have mirrors with them. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah, just like ignore me, just talk to yourself. And you know, the wisdom will just shine through.
Jasmine, tell us, what do you have cooking up that we can get into? How can we continue connecting with you?
Thank you. So you can follow me at Social Work Sage. I will be very honest. It is a crazy time of year for schools. If any of you have school kids or you're in schools, we're trying to figure this out in California. So I have not been posting that much, but I do have a webinar that I will be leading on August 19th, which is the anniversary of my Social Work Sage page on trauma-informed teaching and learning. So if you're a teacher, even if you're a parent and you want to learn about trauma and how it impacts learning and behavior, then please join me on August 19th.
Awesome. I'll make sure to share that out so folks can jump on that.
Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you for making this work. And I hope that you are able to unwind tonight and love up on your baby. And I hope that she falls asleep fast.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Bye. Get home safely, Jasmine.
Thanks.
Hey folks, we are at the baddest. We are talking triggers and how do we address them? How do we uncover them? And what information do they have for us about our healing, about our state of mind, about our spiritual state, all the things. We are tapping in. SJ, hello, Queen. How are you?
Wonderful.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Cheers to you, Queen. I appreciate you. I saw you go live with I'm forgetting her name, but I was like, oh, I gotta tap that queen in and get some of that energy and flavor over here.
I appreciate you. Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
Appreciate you. So we're talking triggers, we're talking trauma, we're talking healing and loving up on ourselves always. To start off, I know you're a healing queen. I know that you are a dope queen. I know you're a reader, you're a coach, but you tell us in your words about your gifts and how you share them with the world.
So I'm a spiritual life coach. I'm a spiritual life coach. I'm also a card reader. I sometimes use them together. So a session with me looks like you come to me with questions and things you want to know more about. I sometimes see visions or tap into things, and then, you're discussing something with me like, hey, me and my boyfriend got into this fight. I don't know what's happening. And between what I see, I'm able to connect those dots and be like, hey, I see something when you were 5 and your dad left. It looks like an abandonment wound. This is abandonment. This is what happens during this process. And it's amazing and a blessing to see someone, the light bulb go off and go, oh my gosh. First of all, how did you know about that? And second of all, yes, like I do remember that and it did bother me. And so I just kind of use them together. I also teach classes. And there's like one class a week, one class a month, one class a month.
You're speaking it into existence.
Okay, yeah. And then on my YouTube channel, I have a YouTube channel which is mainly just my card reading and just tapping into that energy. I sometimes have videos on there that are like life coaching videos, but my IG is where I do most of my life coaching and that sort of thing. So I just kind of like use the things that I've healed from and just spread it to others. That's what I do.
And bless us with your wisdom and your healing. And I love, Jasmine is a social worker and you are a spiritual life coach. And I love the juxtaposition because oftentimes we think that these elements, these aspects of ourselves are disparate and unrelated, but the healing has to be integrated. Like
it does.
We can't neglect the other dimensions of ourselves because then the healing is an incomplete experience.
Right.
So with that said, we're talking triggers, we're talking trauma, which I know is a topic that is near and dear to you. But to set the stage, can you talk about what triggers are and what are triggers and I guess how does it inform the way that you work with your clients?
So a trigger is anything that promotes like an emotional or a physical or like an immediate response, or it immediately takes you back to that age. Like, I don't know if you've ever gotten into it with someone, a grown adult. Yes. And let's just, for example, let's say someone who's afraid of dogs because they got bit by a dog when they were 5. Could be a big burly man, but let a dog roll in there and they're like a little kid, like freaking out because they've been triggered to that space of being 5 years old and being attacked.
Yes.
And it's a trigger because when we get triggered and we do things to protect ourselves from the pain of that moment, we don't emotionally grow past that. So when that trigger happens, we're immediately that age that we were when that trigger happened because we have not emotionally grown past that. So that is trigger. And I'm pretty sure this is going to come up to, that is also a way to identify if that is a trigger for you, right? Where it brings out this response that doesn't feel like yourself, right?
Oh, yes.
It's like, I know myself. I'm a pretty happy person, but I don't know why. When that person said, overweight girl, you could be as skinny as a toothpick, but if you were overweight as a little kid and it triggers you being bullied and all, you're like, I have an attitude for no reason and this isn't who I am. What's going on? It just takes you out of who you are it brings back flashbacks, and it gets you into an emotional space where like you struggle to bring yourself back. You struggle to bring yourself back to inner peace. If you were in a great mood at a party, like the example I used with the dog, it's just hard for that person to calm themselves down and relax because they're having flashbacks, they have anxiety. It's a trigger that they haven't healed or gotten past.
Yeah, and yes, like I love that you highlighted that it literally takes us back to whatever age that traumatic experience, that original wound, like we're literally transported. And that makes so much sense, because experiences that I've had when I've been triggered, it's almost like you're not even yourself. Like you can't even think, you're not thinking as adult self. Like my mind is not the mind of me as an adult. And
Exactly.
That makes so much sense.
Exactly.
But that's also so scary.
You know what? It's scary, but it's not scary. It's scary when you don't know what a trigger is and you feel completely helpless because you just want to stop feeling this way.
Yes.
I want to be in a relationship and be able to be open with my person. I want to be able to be intimate with my person. That's when it's scary, when you feel like this is my life from here on out and I don't even know what to do to fix it. That's when it's scary. When you can understand it's a trigger and you understand you have complete control over taking this bull by the horns and putting in the work to get past it, it's not so scary. It's one of those, like, let's roll our sleeves up and get started, because I'm tired of feeling this way. I'm tired of being afraid of dogs. You know, I need to get over this.
That's super helpful, because then it becomes a block that you're able to remove.
Right. And then you're not in a victim mentality anymore. You literally have control over this. I decide if this is going to take over my life forever or not. I get to decide that.
Folks who have jumped on, we are talking triggers, traumas, and wounds. We are here with the illustrious SJ. She is a spiritual life coach, a healer, a reader, a dope overall queen. So for us, when we're in the space, when we're not super tapped into ourselves, we're not super self-aware, how can we tell what are the signs that we're triggered? And I shared this before, like for me, for a really long time, I didn't know the difference between me being triggered and me reacting to a situation that merited some type of response. So for us, when we're not really tapped into ourselves, how can we tell when we're triggered? Like, what are some of the signs and the symptoms that it's a trigger?
Okay, so for the example that you used, you know it's a trigger and it has nothing to do with a reasonable response to what's taking place in the moment. Number one, when you completely overreact. If you've been triggered by something, let's say, we'll just use cheating, okay? Let's just say that you've been triggered by being cheated on and lied to, okay? And let's just say that this person, they exhibited, for example, you were calling them and you couldn't get a hold of them. So in your mind, you're triggered. You're like, you're not answering your phone because you're cheating on me. I'm not doing this again. We're not doing this. So you leave a voice message. You don't have to call back. Your stuff is outside. I don't really care. And in real life, they just had their lunch switched and they were working. No. It's not. It's really not. It's really not. That's a trigger, okay? That is a trigger, because you literally come up with a story and trying to force it to fit the current situation. You have no proof. You have no facts to stand behind it. The only thing you have is this feeling of, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep going through this anymore. You're responding to this imaginary story that you've come up with in your head, and you're forcing the situation to fit that. Let's just say that your partner, they just had to switch their lunch and they couldn't have their phone turned on the floor. You didn't ask this person any questions. You didn't text them to make sure they were okay. You didn't call their job. Their stuff is waiting outside because they switched to lunch. You're triggered. It did not fit that situation. You completely overreacted. Why? Because the last time you were understanding, you got played, and you don't want to be played again. So now we're completely triggered. And not only is that a trigger, that's also the difference between a trigger and like a non-negotiable. Like, I know some people are like, my non-negotiable is cheating. Da, da, da. Listen, you're literally taking out that trigger and holding your person accountable for that. And that's not going to work in a relationship.
Oh, yes. Ooh, That is valid, valid, valid. So
All
then
day.
we actually take our triggers, instead of addressing it, the underlying wound, and using that to inform our healing. We're making other people responsible and the world responsible for making sure that we don't get triggered.
Right. And when you say that out loud, how selfish does that sound? I need the world to tiptoe around me. I know you don't know me. We could be walking past each other at Walmart, but I need you not to look at me a certain way, because anytime I was looked at a certain way, I would get jumped. So now I'm holding you accountable. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Listen, that is too much pressure to put on anybody, and you shouldn't feel comfortable holding anybody to that type of standard.
Woo. Woo.
And sometimes the reason why we haven't started the healing is because healing starts with accountability. Even in that situation that I just gave, the cheating situation, it's taking accountability for the part you played. Rather the part you played was ignoring red flags, rather the part you played was knowing this person was lying to you, but being in a space of like, I don't want to cause drama, I'm just not going to say anything. That is still a role that you play that you have to take accountability for. But sometimes taking accountability feels like being attacked when we're not ready to heal.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So
like
that's
we're
what
being
we have to
attacked
learn the
right
difference.
now, people, right?
Right. Right.
Folks, we are talking triggers, trauma, the healing work, and what it all looks like with SJ Healing Queen. So for us, when we are in that space, don't know if it's a trigger or a normal response, and we still aren't in the space where we're ready to hear the accountability bit, or maybe we're walking in that direction of taking accountability. How can we uncover and identify our triggers?
First thing, do I have facts? Do I have facts that can back up my response and how I'm feeling in this moment? 2, or did I just come up with the story in my head and I'm trying to force this current situation to fit the narrative? The third one, do I feel like myself? I found, for me personally, when I am giving a justified reason for my response, I can give you current things that happen right now in this moment that you did to piss me off as to why I'm giving you the response I am. And I feel empowered. I feel justified. I feel like myself. But when it's a trigger, you struggle to come up with a reason in that moment. You don't feel like yourself. And when I say you stutter, oh, listen, you can't come up with one reason as to why you are, listen, because you just did, and that's just what it is. Actually, it's not, and that's not okay. You got to know that.
That is so good. Folks, yes, the live is getting saved, and you can get the knowledge straight from SJ as well. I'm going to make sure I share all her details so you guys can connect with her. We are talking triggers and getting our whole lives read to us by SJ, life coach and spiritual healer. So for us, what is the risk we run? And I feel like you've illustrated this. But what's the risk we run by keeping our triggers, our traumas in the shadows?
Despair and destruction. Despair and destruction of such a beautiful soul. Listen, when children are born, we never say, oh, they're going to grow up to be such a triggered little thing. No, they're these precious things. You come into this world with not a care in the world, right?
Yeah.
But we have these experiences that happen to us for a reason, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we heal and grow from them, especially if you have children. That's the risk that you run, passing it on to your children. And listen, when I say passing on to your children, my mother used to smoke when I was little, and she would be smoking, and she would be like, smoking is bad, and you shouldn't smoke when you grow up. So I would say, you know, like normal kids, but you smoke, and she'd be like, and it's bad and don't do it. What happens is when your child starts to go through cheating or whatever that would cause a trauma, you have no idea how to walk them through that process. All you could tell them is, oh, it'll be okay. Oh, I know how that feels, but you have no idea how to get them out of that dark spot. That's the risk you run, and then the cycle continues. So not only are you going to be in the depths of despair because you just feel helpless like this victim, like you just can't get this trigger off of you, you're literally handing it to your child in a bow, and you guys are sitting there in despair together.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. That resonates, that when we are, that then it just becomes lip service. Like we're telling people about themselves, but it's not a supportive, it's not an actual, it's not informed, because we
It's not a
don't know.
GPS. It's not a map. Where do I go from here? I don't know, girl, but I know it's bad. I got married when I was young and it was awful. Okay, but I love this man and he loves me. You're telling me I shouldn't get married when I was young. So what do I go from here? Girl, I don't know, but I just know that me and your uncle got married and that didn't work. Okay, well, some help you are, because what am I supposed to do with that? Or a situation of, you should leave them. This is toxic. Okay, so how do I go about that process? I don't have a job. I have these kids. Ooh, girl, I don't know. I just know that I stayed with so-and-so for way too... Well, thanks, but that doesn't help me in this moment.
Ooh.
So you literally run the risk of being part of a generational curse and wrapping it up in a bow and handing it to the next generation.
And that's exactly how it happens. Like, even when we engage with our, like the folks from the previous generation, they may be commenting on our bodies and saying that we're fat or whatever. They're not in the healthiest space themselves, but it's like they're not able to and they're not able to recognize that there is a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're living. But that's the trauma at work.
And what you're cooking, you're telling me I'm fat, but you just served me. Sit down.
Wow.
This fried chicken and macaroni and cheese and this stuffing and all this gravy all over it, but you're calling me fat. Are you kidding? That's what we're doing? How did that make any sense?
Wow. So, damn. Damn, SJ. So for us, when we are able to engage with our triggers and our trauma, what information can we take out of them? What information do our triggers offer us? And how can we use that to inform our healing?
Ooh, let me tell you something. First of all, when you are in the moment of a trigger, or you have that moment of I'm overreacting, or I'm so mad, where is this coming from? I don't feel like myself. I would encourage you to, in that moment, how does your body feel? Okay? You need to be self-aware of your body. You need to engage in that moment. Because normally when we have a trigger, there's some type of flashback. Or there's some type of feeling of oh, I feel like I'm dealing with my ex. I feel like I'm talking to my mom. I feel like I'm dealing with my ex-friend. There's at some point, something along those lines goes through your head. Why? Because that is where the trigger is coming from.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. If you know, every time I argue with my boyfriend, I get anxiety, I get upset, my heart starts beating out of my chest, I feel my ears and stuff getting hot. Stop. What's happening right now? Why are your ears getting hot? Why do you have anxiety? Why is your heart beating out of your chest? Because that's how it would feel when my mom would yell at me and go on and on and on. And she's an alcoholic and she's looking at me with the crazy eyes. So I don't know what to expect. Cool. All right, bet. How long has she been doing that? Most of my life. Have you ever addressed that with her? No, because she's plumb crazy. But I still harbor resentment from that, right? Because of how it made me feel, because she was an authority figure. I was raised to respect authority no matter what, so I couldn't say anything back to her. So, and these are just examples I'm using. So it's like when my boyfriend yells at me like this, I instantly want to yell back at him because I wasn't able to do that with my mom. I'm not going to let him run over me like that, but I'm still in this state of trigger. Stop. This really has nothing to do with your boyfriend and everything to do with the healing that has not been done. You've identified where it comes from, and that is not enough. I deal with clients all the time that they say, oh, well, I know that it comes from there, and I've identified it. I cannot say this enough. Triggers are healed in the moment of the trigger. I don't care if you have calmed yourself down after the argument. That means nothing. I don't care if you feel better now that the dog is out the room and you can say, oh, it's because I'm afraid of dogs. And that means nothing. Triggers are healed in the moment of the trigger. It is when the dog runs in the room and you are able to stop yourself from freaking out, calm yourself down and say, hey, can you get your dog? Because I'm literally getting ready to freak out. I was bit by a dog when I was 5. Listen, get your dog. Whereas before, you would be climbing on top of the countertop, hollering and screaming.
Yes,
right?
yes,
When you
yes.
can change your behavior in the moment of the trigger, that is healing. It's going to take practice. It does not mean that a dog is going to walk in and you're just going to be eating and chilling. You may always feel some type of way when a dog walks in, but it is your behavior when the trigger happens that will tell you where you're at in your healing in that process.
Ooh, that is valuable information for us. Oh, so I guess when we are, because I hear you saying that it takes practice, it's an experience to go from managing the trigger to addressing that deeper wound. So what are some practices for us around managing the trigger? And then also, what's the work for addressing some of those deeper wounds?
Okay, so it really depends on the particular wound. Like the example that I used with the dog. In that situation, you have to talk yourself through it. Okay, it's a dog. Whose dog is this? Somebody please come get your dog, because I do not listen. If the dog is, I might kick him. Please come get your dog. It is talking yourself through the trigger, okay? Now, in the case of like being triggered with codependency, let's just say, for the sake of argument, I'll use the excuse everybody used. It's retrograde, so my exes come back and they're texting me, right? You're lonely. You know what I'm saying? You're in your feelings, and that one toxic ex calls, right? You're in your feelings. You need comfort. In the moment of that trigger, we're going to replace it with something else. We're going to stay busy because we're feeling lonely. If you just sit there and just watch your phone ring, or I'll just call someone else. No, we need to change what we're doing. We need to be busy because we're in our feelings. We're feeling emotional. We're feeling nostalgic. I'm lonely. I'm ready to text it. What you doing? I'm about to tell you what I'm doing. I got my spin a night bag already. What I'm doing. Okay. Before you take a shower. Okay, before you take a shower, pack that in the night bag. We're gonna work out. Okay, we are going to watch a movie. We are going to do something to replace that and keep ourselves busy, because those emotions, if we sit in them, what do you do with those? You have to expend them in some type of way. You can't talk yourself through that necessarily, because talking yourself through that will go back down to memory lane, and before you know it, you in your car making a drive you ain't got no business driving. So everything is different, but you have to find what works for you. Like I said, that's where practice comes in at. And again, if it's the type of situation where every time I argue with my best friend, I'm feeling my ears are hot, this, that, and the third, maybe you and that friend don't need to be friends. Yeah. We are still addressing that trigger, but that's also where you say, I have boundaries.
Yes.
That's how I'm handling that trigger. I don't deal with people who scream at me when they're upset. There's a way for you to communicate with me. And if I've already told you, listen, yelling at me triggers me, I'm going to need you not to do that. You're changing your behavior in the moment of the trigger because you're telling the person, don't yell at me. I don't like being yelled at. And they're still doing it. How we handle that? We don't deal with that person. So every trigger is different. But there are ways, some triggers you have to replace it with a different behavior. There are other triggers that you can talk yourself through them.
Yeah. And then once we recognize that this is a trigger, but it's pointing to a deeper wound, it's pointing to an original trauma, what's some work that maybe you engage with your clients around addressing the deeper issue? Because some things are triggers, but you can only manage it so far. Like at some point, like we need to get at the nitty gritty and address that original wound. So like what's some of that work that you might engage with your clients around cleaning up that wound?
I actually suggest that everybody get to the core of the wound. I am not a level type of healer. Like I'm a core healer. I don't care if you were bit by a dog when you were 5, okay? I need for you to write it, because listen, we're grown now. We don't know where the person is. I need you to write a letter to the owner and let the owner know how you felt when they weren't able to secure their dog properly and how that made you feel. We get to the root of that, because what does that mean? That means that it made you feel unsafe. It made you not trust people. It made you feel like nobody's going to protect me but me. So we're going to start from the root and go all the way up. We're going to write a letter to that person because we don't know where they are now. Okay. To the owner of that dog. I don't appreciate the fact that you couldn't control your dog. You let your dog come into my yard and bit me. Now we're going to start working on feeling not safe. And what we do to sabotage things or maybe connections because we have this wound of not feeling safe. We feel like nobody can care for us or nobody has our safety. We're going to go all the way up to the top. It takes soul searching and it takes being honest with yourself, because I can promise you, I have run into people that do not want to admit that they are hurt. So they will not admit that there is an issue deeper than that. If you cannot, and they don't want to admit that they're hurt, because they're tired of being hurt. I don't want to be a victim anymore. And if I admit that I'm still hurt, that means there's still a part of me in their mind that is still a victim of this thing. It really takes being honest with yourself. You are not the only person in the world with traumas and triggers. And I know people that when they hear traumas and triggers, they hear weakness, they hear gullible, they hear you have work to do, unhealed heathen just walking the streets, you know? And it's like, listen, as long as you have that mind frame, you are literally sabotaging your own healing because you don't want to admit that you still are not healed in certain areas of your life.
Wow. Wow. It's just like layers on top of layers on top of layers.
And I can also tell you it's a domino effect. When you start healing and that domino starts, you are going to uncover, just like what I did with the dog. It started with the dog bite, but that lack of feeling safety and that lack of feeling like someone else, anybody else around you could protect you, spills over to relationships. It spills over into friendships. So now you're healing this wound and you're realizing there are tons of relationships I literally sabotaged because I didn't trust somebody who wanted me to believe that they could protect me, that I was safe. I didn't give them the opportunity to keep me safe. I always had my guard up. I didn't want to be vulnerable. And it's like a domino effect. So at the same right, as you heal a lot of your core wounds, it's a domino effect.
Yes, that's beautiful. And can you offer us a piece of advice that we can carry, put in our back pocket, that would support us to get to inner peace?
Do not stop, one, okay? Because like I said, it's a domino effect. You could be starting with a dog bite, and then before you know it, you're opening up all these other doors. And two, this is a big one. This is a journey where you are to celebrate every little win you have. I do not care if you're like, look, I was driving in my car and I saw a loose dog and I didn't scream. We're going to celebrate that. Do not expect anybody else to celebrate you or be excited for you. And I'm not saying don't expect things from people, but I'm literally saying understand this is your journey. Nobody should be clapping or more proud of you than you. I don't care how small that win is. I don't care how big it is. Okay? I don't care if you're posting on Facebook or Instagram every other day. Oh my gosh, I drove down the highway for the first time without Listen, who cares what anybody has to say about it? You celebrate yourself every single day of your journey. Okay? I'm telling you now, just really quick, I remember times on my healing journey where I literally felt like I was just this constantly healing, constantly. It was always something I was healing from. As soon as I thought I had healed from something else, you know? But it all becomes worth it when my daughter, she's 15, my oldest, and she would, first day of school, okay, it was on Tuesday, and we're having a conversation. And we in the conversation, and she leaves, and then she comes back, and she's like, Mommy, you owe me an apology, and I just want you to apologize. So I'm like, all right, bet. But tell me what I did so I know what I'm apologizing for so I don't do it again. And as she's talking to me, explaining to me what I said that upset her, as she's talking to me, I was able to identify that's a trigger. That has nothing to do with me. So I literally stopped her and I said, wait a minute. That's a trigger. Do you know what that is? Explained it. And then she did not understand. Like, she literally looked at me like, you always apologize when you're wrong? So what's happening? Like, how is this my fault? Like, she was really confused. So I walked her through it. Come to find out, when she was 4 years old, my ex-husband, her dad, He is military. My dad was military, so I get it, but he was always deployed. And when she was 4, I ended up having her little sister. Okay. I thought that I was being mom of the year, right? I'm thinking, okay, husband's deployed. I'm going to spend time with my kid, spend time with my baby, and then spend time with them together. And in actuality, I'm thinking I did a good thing. First of all, I know I did a good thing. I did the best I could do with the options I was given, okay? But for what happened, but the thing is, you don't get to choose what your children become traumatized by. You don't get to choose what memories they remember, okay? So I'm thinking I'm doing a great thing, but what my daughter remembered was, my dad is gone and I don't get to control when he comes back. I'm used to having my mom to myself, and then my sister came. I didn't ask for her. And now when my mom spends time with me, just me and her, I don't get to determine when she's going to take her time away and give it to my sister. And then when I get her back, I have to share her with my sister. It created an abandonment wound. And I thought I was doing a good thing. I know I did a good thing. But for her, it literally came up with an abandonment wound that carried. Yeah. So as I'm explaining this to her and explaining the shadow work and things that need to happen, because you cannot control what someone says to you, and I don't want you triggered every time someone says this to you, right? It was the look on her face, the aha moment. She was so excited. But for me, it's like a light bulb went off. This is generational curse breaking in lifetime. Could you imagine where we would be at right now if someone taught us how to identify our triggers? And I even gave her tips, like I just gave you guys, on talking yourself through them, so she knows what to do even if I'm not there. You can talk yourself through that trigger so you're not in school triggered all day. You know how to talk yourself through that. I've given her the tools to handle it on her own. Could you imagine where we would be at? Imagine the relationships that we would have chosen, the men or women that we would have attracted if we knew how to identify our triggers, okay, and work on them, do shadow work and heal them at 15? Are you kidding me? By the time she's 25 and the time that she has her own kids, this is going to be normal communication dialogue. Are you kidding? So what's happening is well, in my house, I'm creating a whole new generation that understands healthy dialogue, traumas, and triggers. And they're just passing it down like it's this normal thing. I have parents that don't apologize when they're wrong. They just wait for a long period of time and then ask you hungry? No. No, I'm not hungry. I'm still upset. Okay? Yeah. So to go from that to someone who can, that is a trauma, that is a trigger, let's work on that. That is why we heal.
That is oh my God. That's, in action, like healing in action.
Lifetime. And not just that, I got excited at the thought that I have an 11-year-old daughter, right? There are things that not everybody feels comfortable talking to their mom about, but sisters talk. Let my 11-year-old go to my daughter and talk to her. My daughter can identify that's a trigger, and this is what we do. Like, are you kidding? It was like the light bulb went off. We always talk about being a generational curse breaker. And it's like, what exactly does that mean? So in that moment, it was like I literally understood this is what it means. Wow. I'm breaking curses and it's rolling down to the next generation. It's going to be normal and healthy. Healing is going to be healthy. It's not going to be something that we have to write memes about. It's okay for men to cry. No, that's a normal thing.
It's just going to be the way they engage.
Right.
That's beautiful.
That's why we heal.
Beautiful. Oh man, Ashley, that's beautiful. It really is. I know you're doing lots of dope things. Oh man, I'm so and I have a 17. She just turned 17, and it's like I'm also grateful that in the way that I get to engage with her is very different to the way that the care and the attention that I receive, because I've been able to like work on some stuff, and as a result, like she also gets to benefit, and like the language that they have with each other, and like what their boundaries, what they think is acceptable, it's all informed by that.
I love it.
It's beautiful. Oh,
I love it. That's awesome.
My heart is full. You fed me, man. You fed me. So tell us, how can we continue to connect with you? What do you have cooking up that we can dive into?
Well, you can follow me on my Instagram. It is looking for a sign, the number, not the word, Okay. Also, I have a class this month on August 18th. Okay. You can purchase tickets on my website. It is how to identify self-sabotaging behavior and how to stop it. That is the class that I'm doing for this month. Like I also said, you can find me on YouTube. I do post daily. Those are different card readings with the zodiac signs, as well as sometimes I do like life coaching videos, like aha moments. And then I also have a Patreon account, which also caters to the zodiac sign readings and things that I do, and the messages and stuff that come through. I do have certain readings and things that I offer just for my Patreon. So it's a really good time. It's a really awesome thing. I also have other things in the works that are going to be coming through. I want to say by the end of this month, hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll get the prototype and everything for it. So I'm really excited about that. But yeah, nothing but growth over here.
Ooh, I'm gonna make sure I drop all that, and we are super, super, super grateful. Thank you for feeding us and for loving up on us, and
Thank you
yeah,
for
we'll keep
having
connected.
me.
We'll keep talking. Thank you so, so much, SJ.
You're
I
so
appreciate
welcome. You're
you,
amazing.
Queen. Bye, guys. That was the baddest. See you next time. Bye,
Bye.
SJ.
Bye-bye.